Hello and welcome. My name's John Mandeville. For those of you who may not know me, I'm the Academy Coach that's here to help you with any questions you've got around content you want to find in the Academy or ideas about your own learning path. If you want to get in touch and have a conversation about that, do just drop a DM to me. My name's at the bottom of the screen there, John Mandeville. But if you watch this and you've got questions as you go through, pop a comment in, pop a reply, and I'll endeavour to answer them. But let's get the conversation going. So, today I'm going to go back to my Power Automate world, my favourite. And as I've suggested in this digest series, we're going to look at best practices for Power Automate. Now, errors for me, problems as you build, problems as you run a flow that you may have inherited. For me, it's more of a personal endeavour, so best practice is perhaps not applicable. What I want to say is some practices that I feel can help you because they've helped me, and that's what I'm going to share today, is practices that have helped me in my journey through Power Automate to shorten that time lag between opening up your Power Automate flow and maybe starting to build it and getting it working as you want to do. So we're going to look at some techniques and some practices that I favour. I'd encourage you, if you're going through this and you think, well, I do something and I'd like to share it, please do share your tips in the comments, or if you're watching this on the watch party, share it in chat as we go through. Love to hear what you do in part of your practice. I'm also going to share with you one tried and tested structure, I'll call it. I think that's the right word. Pattern is probably a better word in Power Automate that you can build into your Power Automate flows that in a lot of different scenarios can make your flows more resilient. So we'll look at some practice and then we'll look at a pattern, and that's the way this demo is going to go. All right, well, I hope you enjoy it. As you go through, I'll ask you the odd question, and like I say, please do post your comments, post your thoughts as you're going through and watch this video. All right, let's go. So you'll see on screen what I've got here. I'm going to quickly orientate you to this. Is I've got, we'll look in SharePoint. I've got a list of data. This is the same list of data I used for the data management best practice. There's like 1,000 odd rows in SharePoint. But it's relatively simple data. We've got a few columns here, but the things I want to point out today that I'm going to kind of manipulate a little bit, if you like, are some values in the cost per item. Yeah, probably that's about it. It's just a load of items. There's a volume for an order number, and the cost for each of those line items. So we're going to do some rudimentary calculations. I've got a flow here, which is the same flow we started with last week. It's not optimized particularly, but it basically wakes up when I decide to wake it up. It'll go get me the items. Let me just show you this flow now. It'll go and get the items from the list. Ignore the blurb there. But I've got a filter in it. I've got this OData query that I talked about last time where I'm filtering it to bring back just data after a certain date. But here, just for the sake of speed, I'm going to bring back the top 10. And in fact, that's probably the first tip I'm going to give you when you are experimenting with flows and you're running into errors. What you may want to do is you may want to refine the trigger to bring back a much smaller amount of data in the first instance, because that'll allow you to cycle through your iterations a lot quicker. So that's why I've done this. I've said just get me 10 rows. So as I test it, if this were to work or to fail, I get feedback really quickly rather than waiting for 1,000 records to load in. So that's probably tip number one. So let's get this running and we'll see it'll run really nicely. All it does is goes and gets the top 10 items that match that criteria. I set up a variable to contain some data, and then what I do, and I'll show you this code again, is I basically create a record in this array which looks like this. It's got a customer ID, it's got an amount, this is all data from SharePoint, and it does a calculation. Again, if you want to know how that calculation works, I'll briefly show you, but you can go back to the data session from 2 weeks ago. It's just a simple multiply in an expression which is here. Let me see if I can open that up. So there you go. Multiply the field for, which in SharePoint is the amount column, by the inline cost. That's all it does. Okay, it's really simple. So putting aside the simple use case here, what it'll do is it'll create a new piece of information, append that to the array, and then at the end, I just show that whole array. So you saw that worked beautifully. How many of us have ever had the flow that's a little bit bigger, a bit more complex than this work beautifully first time? I'm going to guess not everybody, certainly not me. So what I'm going to show you now is a couple of strategies that you can take if you start to get into some errors. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to quickly swap over and go to my SharePoint list over here. And in fact, off screen, tell you what I'm going to do. Off screen, I'm going to create an error. Okay, I'm not going to tell you what this error is. I just want to manipulate my data so there is an error. And then you can see where we start the journey of going through error handling. So I've just done that. I'm going to retest this. I'm going to test it manually. So that what that means is go and get the data from the source again, run the whole flow. And I have got a tip in a moment that I'm going to show you that's really helped me out a couple of times. So it's gone and got my data, initialized the variable. Instantly we can see we've got something a little bit different. And this is where the journey in error handling begins for me. And I suppose the first tip that I would love to share is don't panic. I used to see these wonderful pink things, and in the older canvas, they're in different locations. I see these errors, and there's a lot of words, and it can be overwhelming. But there are for me, this is a journey about finding clues. And error handling is very much about finding clues, putting clues together, figuring out what the most likely culprit is, and then validating that hypothesis. And then you can go and do something about it. So here. The first tip I want to give you is do take note of the errors, but the specific pieces of information in these errors that are more common than in other areas. So more commonly you will see phrases and words that if you look out for, if you're tuned into, are going to start to help you. Now you might be looking at this screen, you might know what this is instantly, but let me just walk you through a thought process which can help you. The first thing to note is at the top, or wherever this error shows for you, we see this action. Okay? It's specifically calling out an action in Power Automate, append to array variable, which has failed. Okay? On screen, we have some clues. We have a failure somewhere in this area. What that's now doing is on my notepad, if I keep a notepad of clues, okay, in that area, in that apply to each loop, which I know goes around 10 times, it's telling me the append to array variable action has failed. So number one, look out for the word action. That's going to help you 9 times out of 10. It'll tell you where the problem is. Okay. Another really important phrase, and I don't think it's a well put phrase, but it will be there for a reason, is the template language function. Love that. If you want to have a guess with yourself what that actually means, if I translate it for you, what it means is the expression. Okay. Just translate those 4 words to the words expression. So what I now know is I know the action. I know it's an expression. If I've built this flow myself, I know to be looking at an expression in that action. And then we can see here the additional bit of information, mul. Okay, so I know that is the expression that exists in this action. So it's about clue building. And then what we'll also see are other phrases. Now, when we talk about inputs or parameters, again, know that what that really means is things you've given to the expression, pieces of data you've passed in to have the expression perform an action. Look out for those kind of clue phrases in your actions as you go through, and you'll start to narrow down where problems happen a little bit faster than if you've just kind of gone, oh, okay, right, I'm going to click around and wonder where this problem is. So they're the first kind of things that I wanted to share with you. The next tip that I would share with you is I've now got an assertion that in this action, probably somewhere, there is an expression which has a problem. All right, well, I could now start to try and have a look around this screen and figure out what's going on. You can see here I've got action failed, I've got inputs, it's a bit overwhelming. But what I tend to do is I'll just duplicate the tab. So you see me doing that on screen there. The reason I'm doing that is because what I want to do is to flip into the edit mode for that particular flow. And let's inspect what is actually happening. You might have the 2 screens side by side. That's also legitimate. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking to see what this area of my flow does. So that's the second tip I probably want to just share with you is go and inspect what's actually happening. So we know there's an action with an expression. So I can look at this bit of it, which has a big exclamation mark, and go, well, there's no expressions there. There's just dynamic content. Okay, fine. Click on here. This is the bit I think, okay, now we can start to see that there's an expression. Well, most likely there's a problem with that expression. All right. It's telling me, if I look at here, that it expects some parameters to be something else. Right. So probably, again, building the clues, something in the information I'm passing to Mull is causing me a problem. Right, great, fantastic, I know that. What I would love to do is to validate that assertion. So there's another thing that you can do when you're in this world of error handling and you've got problems in loops. This apply to each is reporting an overall failure. Well, actually what it's doing is it's reporting it's got a failure somewhere. So just start to kind of really use the interface and loop through each of the records, and you'll start to make observations. Okay, well look, I've got a tick there. Let's keep looping through. Let's keep looking through all the records that it's processing. All right, so what I'm starting to build a picture of here is that in this loop where there has been a failure, I know the append to array variable has a problem with it. However, it doesn't happen for all the rows. And we know that if you've ever watched any of my sessions before, you can click into actions and you can start to get used to the data that's being pushed through your Power Automate flow. So here, for record 5, for example, I've clicked on this and I can see the actual data that's being processed. Fantastic. Well, that looks fine. Let's just quickly scroll through some more. We see it changing and we see it changing. Oh, here's a limitation of Power Automate. When you have errors in actions and you want to inspect the data, you can't always inspect the data because this bit of the actions failed. It's dumped you out, if you like. So I'm going to show you a strategy now which I think has helped me more times than any other strategy, and that is, let's just go into the editable thing here. Expose the information. If it's in a loop, expose the information inside the loop. If it's an action happening, expose information before that action and have a look at it. So then you can see what goes into the action and actually start to figure out what's going wrong. So we're going to create a compose here. And this is the one that, like I say, I use more times than I use other ones. And what I will do is I will say, I'm just going to type some words in just to help me. It's called debugging. It's called like putting inline logging, if you like. So you're logging information so you can see it. Okay, so I know I've got 2 pieces of data that I'm working with. So first of all, let's put the, I'm just going to click see more. Let's put the amount in. So here's the amount. Put yourself as much or as little information here as you like, and obviously be a little bit better with your syntax. Now, inline, I should use this. Thank you, Valerie, for reminding me about typing into there. Gets you to your variables quicker, is the line cost. So what I'm expecting to see, I'm going to just put something around these values so I know where the value starts and finish is. Right. It's the inline cost. Okay, so let me just give this a proper name. Expose the data, click save. Okay. So what I'm now going to do is I'm now going to run this test, and what it's going to allow me to do is I'm going to see the data as it goes through each of the loops, and then I can start to build an assertion about what might be going wrong. Now, there's another thing I just do it in sort of instinctively now, part of my process, but I want to just call this out. If you're not used to Power Automate, it's really helpful to use these tests, this test button up here. Now, there's a couple of things I want to point out. If you're running a flow, you can run it manually. Okay, so you can go and trigger the flow from the data, but I know this flow has already run, so I'm going to bias towards the speed of testing being increased if I use automatically and use the recently used trigger when it failed. All that means for the layman who's maybe not used Power Automate too much is I've already run this process. It's grabbed the data from SharePoint and it's failed midway through. I can exploit that and I can say, look, let's just try that again, shall we? Don't go and get the data again. Use the data you've got in memory and let's have a look at what happens. It's a really valuable tip to just start to use automatically as you're testing and as you're going through your process to speed up your error handling flow. I would suggest as well, even if you have problems, so we've still got the error, that's fantastic. If you're having problems with your flows, maybe you want to test out something where you're, like 2 weeks ago, using OData as your trigger, OData to filter your information coming in. You can still use this approach. What I'd encourage you to do is to take a very vanilla trigger, like get items with no filters in it, maybe I'll show you this in a minute, put a terminate underneath the get items. And then what you can do is you can draw in as much data as you want to a flow and then start to build your flow, but test with that data that you've already got in your Power Automate flow, knowing that you're not touching the original SharePoint list. Perhaps that's changing all the time. Perhaps you don't want to touch it. And equally, you can stop your flow with a terminate to stop it going and doing anything. And again, I'll show you that in a minute. A bit of a digression. But what I want to show you here is that before, we knew we had a problem in this loop. We had a problem with this append to array variable. But now what we can do is we've got a tick here so we can see the data. We can see what's happening. Okay, so I've got some words there. This is the record data that I'm having trouble with. 254 was the amount and blank is the line cost. Let's start to build up some intelligence. So this isn't a rocket science problem that we're facing here. This is just one I've manufactured to demonstrate the point. But you'll see there, I can now see that in the records that pass, I've got data. Fantastic. And the records that fail, if we go back, the ones where we've got those exclamation, we haven't got data. So we can now assert that we've got problems in our data, and that's what's causing this particular error. So what I want to suggest there is there's probably a few techniques that I whizzed through. I'll just do a recap. There is looking out for the word action. There's looking what's on screen. There's looking for the template language function phrase. That means an expression. And there's looking for phrases like parameters or inputs, which lead you towards actions where you're having problems. There's then the act of looking at the data as it's flowing through your Power Automate flow in the inputs and outputs, particularly the body. Okay, I've shown you before, but I would strongly encourage you to get used to taking outputs if it's in JSON format and using JSON formatters to genuinely read the data where you're having problems. So before I move away from this example, there's probably a couple of other things I'd like to share with you. They're not necessarily applicable to this one flow and this particular error. We know this flow's caused because we've got some missing data. We're going to deal with that in a minute. In fact, I'll just show you what's causing it. If we look over here, we have nothing or nulls in these records here, and that's really legitimate. Okay, so you may have data that you pull into Power Automate that's got problems like this. Now, we're going to go into a defensive strategy later on in this demonstration. I will say there are some really useful, there are some really useful expressions that you can lean into which can cater for null values, that sort of thing. We're not going to cover that today. That can be a session if you want to, is to look into some expressions and how you can use them to defensively manage data coming into your Power Automate flow. But I guess there's a couple of other things I just wanted to share with you. If we just very briefly go up here, again, if you hadn't gone through that process, another trick you can try is having a look at the data as it flows through your flow. I do encourage this very strongly, is to go to the outputs of actions and have a look at the body. Okay, so it might look like gobbledygook, but if you copied this, let me just try and go to a JSON formatter. You can choose the one that you like. Okay. This probably isn't the best example. However, I use JSON Beautifier as an extension, but having rebuilt my desktop, it's not there anymore. Just start to go through the data in, let's just quickly recap, the data in the body of your outputs and start to have a look at it, because you're going to get clues from there. So we see we've got record ID 1, we've got fields with an ID, I've got field 4, which is my amount there. I don't seem to have anything else there. Let's keep going down. Scroll down to the next item. We've got field ID 3, 313 in field 4. Okay. So I know that I'm looking in here, and I could do searches and finds. Let's just go to another record, field 5. I've got 193 items. And if I look into here, I actually have an inline cost. So again, if you were to just look at the data, knowing what is important to you, using perhaps a JSON beautifier, it's in that format, or using the Power Automate flow, inspecting information, you start to get clues and intelligence. We can see there that there's data missing. That's the cause of this particular problem, okay? One other thing, I did talk about this, but I find this quite useful. If I'm ever trying to test, what I might do is I might use a terminate. And you can set this up in loads of different ways. So I might be cancelling the flow rather than showing it as failing. I might first of all just want to get some data and have a look at it in the manner I've just done. I know my flow's failing, so let's step through this methodically. And that's another error handling technique that I use a lot. So as well, if I have an inkling, I'll use compose. If I don't have an inkling, I'll go through methodically and look at the data in each of my actions, and I'll use this terminate to first of all stop after get items. So let's just show you what that looks like. So I'll manually, in this case, go through. What this allows me to do is to pull all the data that I want in, take a look at it, and then I can start to refine my flow off the back of that. This is going to take a little while, I think. Run flow. It shouldn't do actually because I've got that limit in. So what it looks like if you go back to your flow runs is we've got the test cancel, but you can start to go into those tests very quickly and have a look at the data that's coming in the same manner as I just showed you. Then what you can do is you can go, right, well, I get my data now. Let's move this down maybe to the next step. Or one thing to note, you can't put terminates inside loops. It does not like it. Okay, so it won't let you do that. But what I can do is I could put terminate below the loop. For example, if I've got a flow that goes off and does some things, it'll just speed up your testing cycle. So in this case, what it would do is it would read through the 10 records, expose the data that's failed, append to the array anyway, but it will just stop there. Imagine that's like a Teams message piece. So terminate is really helpful. In the same manner, I'm going to say this, people don't like doing it, but I don't mind doing it if I'm really stuck. Don't be afraid to strip your flow back. In the same way that terminate will stop your flow there, go back and rebuild it carefully. If your problem is occurring somewhere down here, or maybe it's a long flow and it's occurring a little bit further down, don't be afraid to go and do a new version, strip it back, do it piece by piece, because it's only through that careful intelligence gathering that you kind of spot the problems as they arise, because very often in an error, the challenge is not necessarily where you see it, but it might be a piece of data coming before that into your flow. So I know that's a bit of an information fire hose, but I just wanted to share with you those are the kind of practices, I guess I'm going to say, that I try to use an awful lot. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, let me just delete this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a defensive technique that you can put in. Let's assume that you do not know your data particularly well and you're trying to get a flow running and something is going wrong, you know, in some of your records. Well, it's quite nice to get the good records to run through and get it to work. And I'm going to show you a strategy that can help you in that endeavor. Okay, so in order to set this up, I'm just going to talk you through the process. What I'd like to do is go through these records now. I'm actually going to put the error back in so it doesn't run. In fact, let's just check the error is still there. So the error is still there. I've still got blank records. I'm going to implement a way that this first variable, we'll call it initialize orders. I'm going to implement an initialize errors. Okay, so it's going to be another variable. Should probably call that ARR errors because it's an array. There we go, it's all blank. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to put the good orders into an array called orders, and if I find any errors, I'm going to put them into the initialize errors. So I'm going to store the errors so I can look at them separately, but good records will flow through. And I'm going to do this using a technique which is borrowed from coding. I'll talk about it later, but I'll show you the setup, and you might have seen this before. But first of all, we're going to go into this loop and we're going to start to effectively create what's called a scope. So if you've seen this before, this might be quite familiar, but I'll talk those of you who've not seen this before through what I'm going to do. So I'm going to call this a try scope. And now that's just a word I'm applying to it. It's just the name of a grouping of actions. That's what scope can do. It groups actions for you, but it can also allow you to do things if that group succeeds or fails. You can do this on individual actions as well, but scopes are really, really valuable. So this one, I'm going to create orders. So let's just put a little dash in there. Try create orders. Okay. And I'm going to just pull this up here and pull this into here. All that's doing is it's saying, right, go through my loop 10 times and create some orders. Try to create the orders. The next structure that you create is another scope. Have a guess with yourself what this one's called. If you're familiar with coding, you'll know what I'm doing here. Okay, catch. Okay, so what we're doing is we're going to create another group of actions that will take place if there is a problem in this little group of actions. Okay, so what I'll do is I will, I'm just going to create myself a little compose, just again so I can really show you what's going on. And I'll put some dynamic content into there. I'm just going to show the current item. There's probably, yeah, I don't want to show that. No, I'm just going to show the, I'll just show the ID. Okay, that's all I want to do. But what I'm going to do in this box here is I'm also going to append to the errors array. That's the reason I set it up at the top. So we'll append to a different errors array. And the thing that we're going to put into the errors array is the ID of the thing that just failed. So that one there showed the error. I put the ID into it. This one here, I'm going to just append that ID into an array. Okay, that's all I need to do. I'm just going to tweak these things at the bottom. Rather than show me all the orders, I use this another time. I'm going to show the length of the array, which relates to orders. Okay, add that. So show me, number of orders. Again, just a nice debugging technique. Just use composes to get information and strip them out when you don't need them is what I would say. Let's just go again, length of the errors. Okay, there we go. Number of errors. I think I typed that correctly. Okay, so that's all lovely, John. That's fantastic. What you've got now is for each loop, it's going to do a box of items. It's going to go, right, for this record, expose the data, put it into the array and do the multiplication. That might fail. For this one, it's going to say, create me some information, show me the ID of the errored record and append it to an errors array. But there's one crucial piece missing here. If you go to the scope itself, you have some options here as they're called run after. Well, it's called run after. You can decide when this box of things happens. And it's a really beautiful little technique to say, if this box of tricks is successful, has timed out, is skipped, has failed, then do this. It's like an if then. So what I'm going to do is say, I don't really care. I don't want to do this if it's successful. So you untick that. I want to do it if it's failed. You can set things up to do it if it's skipped, if it's timed out. There's all sorts of conditions. You notice here you get a little indicator of when this particular scope is going to run. And if you hover over it, it's failed. Sorry, it will run when things have failed. So what's going to happen now is it'll try and do this for every record, this loop, so 10 times. It'll try and do the techniques, the things we want to do in the try box. If it fails, we've got a catch. It's a safety net. That's what it's for. It's a technique borrowed from coding. There's lots of examples of try catch in professional development practice, but we can implement it here. There's not an out-of-the-box try catch structure, but we've just created one there. Okay. So why is that good, John? What does that do? Let's just quickly save that just because I don't want to lose my work. And let's test it. So again, I'm just going to test it automatically because I've got data in my flow already. I'll use that practice to speed things up. Let's just give it a test and see what results this gives us. Okay. So now excuse me, I've got an error down here, invalid template. There you go, template language expressions. So I've put something wrong into there. It doesn't matter, that's fine. I'll go and fix that in a second. The bit I want to show to you here is that this loop now has succeeded because it knew that it's okay if there's an error, it'll pass to this set of actions here, and you can see what's happened is if we go the first record, which we know is that first one's got a missing piece of data, couldn't append to an array, so it defaulted down to here, and these have all run. So show the error. This one failed, dude. It's record number 1. Okay, it's going to put it into it's going to append that to the array. Let's just have a look at what I've done here down in errors, so I can get it working for you. I can't spell. I didn't even spot that, and my eyes just skimmed over it. So we'll retest it again. This should work. It was just a typo. Sometimes typos are the biggest thing in error handling. Okay, there we go. So what we can now see, there's 2 important things to note here is the number of orders that succeeded was 8 out of 10, and there were 2 errors. We know that's true. So again, we've validated our assertion, but also the important thing here, we've now got a succeeded flow. So this is a technique you can use if you want to maintain the integrity of your flow, not have it bomb out, but defend against known problematic data. Okay? Just a really nice example there that I've used a few times now, and I'm going to start and continue to experiment with to help me. So that's really what I wanted to share with you today. What I'd love to know are if you can pop into comments or into chat if you're watching this on the watch party, what your key takeaways might be, what questions this raises for you, what practices you implement to help you that you've not seen me try and demonstrate today, because I'd love to hear about those and how you go about solving problems in your flows. Maybe you've got a wacky and wild solution that we've not explored here. But I hope that's helpful to you, and I will see you at the very next live session we do on the Academy. Do go and check out the events calendar. We've got lots of good stuff coming up in 2025. We've also got a user group coming up if you're watching it before that date. If not, do go and check the events list in the Academy, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Take care.